Hi, and welcome to this 7th episode of Our World War II Dad. I'm Chris Cangilla, and of course I'm joined by Ken Cangilla, my brother, and we created this podcast to share the stories of our father, Army Private First Class Louis Cangilla, who served in Europe during World War II as a replacement soldier with the 99th Infantry Battalion Separate, also known as the Viking Battalion. Ken, I'm so excited about this special episode because we're going to recap our memorable trip to Minneapolis, St. Paul for that terrific roundtable discussion about the 99th. And we'll talk about the opportunity we had to share stories with some of the other relatives that had family members in our World War II Dad's battalion, as well as those fantastic discussions we had with the men who brought us the Viking Battalion, which is this incredible book, an anthology of what the 99th Infantry Battalion Separate endured during World War II, as told by the soldiers themselves. And recently, we had that incredible, fortunate opportunity to talk with another World War II son, if you will, one of the editors of the Viking Battalion, Erik Brun, an expert with the 99th, whose dad was with our World War II Dad in C Company of the 99th. Now, Ken, your interactions with Erik Brun was, a huge help to you in your Europe trip and your undertaking in retracing Dad's steps, right?
That's exactly right. I've been in contact with Erik for a number of years now. I first got to know him through the 99's Facebook page and then reached out and spoke with him directly as I did my research getting ready to go to Europe. And he really pointed me down the right path, put me in touch with some wonderful people who had some additional information in Europe. So he's just been an extremely valuable resource, and he's become a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a really terrific guy. So we'll have Erik's interview a little bit later. I want to kick off this whole episode with our trip to Minnesota, the birthplace of the 99th Infantry Battalion, the Viking Battalion.
Starting out early this morning. Got my coffee. Heading out for a walk before heading up to Minneapolis. So excited to meet some of the other World War II relatives from Dad's unit, the 99th Infantry Battalion Separate.
All right, off to Minneapolis to meet the authors and see my brother. Should be a good time.
Well, there he is. He made it.
You betcha. Quick fight.
That's a good-looking hat you got there, brother.
You're ready for some historical fun?
Yeah, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
All right.
That's good, too.
We're ready. Let's go.
Let's do it.
And we did have fun. It was a jam-packed couple of days. We started out by going up to the grounds near the state capitol at St. Paul to the Minnesota World War II Memorial.
Yeah, those grounds were a surprise to us. We were just out investigating and we kind of stumbled across it. And it was really neat to see what they had done to remember what had taken place during World War II. There was a lot of things there to look at, but one of the favorite things we saw was the gun from the USS Ward. It's an incredible deck gun that was on display on the grounds there by the Capitol. The USS Ward was a Wicks-class destroyer that served in part during the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor. According to the U.S. Navy, that massive gun that we saw fired the first shot against Japan in World War II, sinking a Japanese submarine that was making its way into the harbor prior to the air attack that took place that fateful day.
Yeah, we learned that in 1942, the Ward was then, kind of recommissioned and converted into a high-speed transport, still working in the South Pacific, of course. But then she was struck by a kamikaze plane and sunk. And the weirdest thing about this, get this, that happened on December 7th, 1944, exactly 3 years to the day after she fired that first shot on the Japanese sub in Pearl Harbor. And Ken, that gun, it was so cool to see up close. And of course, we took turns sitting in the seats and imagining what those men saw looking down that long barrel.
Yeah, that was really great to see that gun up close and in person, and it's really neat that they have put it there. In fact, the gun was gifted by the Navy to the state of Minnesota in 1958 to honor the Minnesota reservists who manned the USS Ward in Pearl Harbor on that date that shall live in infamy.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. You know, we also stopped by Fort Snelling, which is that historical fort. You know, the construction of Fort Snelling was completed back in, I guess, 1925, so a long time ago. And among other uses, it served as the primary center for the U.S. government forces during the Dakota War in 1862. It was a recruiting station for many wars, including the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. And in October of 1942, and this is how it looked in that year, well, in 1942, Fort Snelling was the site of the early stages of the training of the 99th Infantry Battalion separate. And after they formed up in Camp Ripley, they moved down to the Fort Snelling site for just a couple of months before they made their final move for training in Camp Hale in Colorado. And just a reminder for everybody, you know, our dad wasn't with them during that training because he was a replacement soldier and he didn't join up with them until 1944 in France. So it took him a little time to get to them and they did a lot of training, but boy, he was a big part of it once he got there.
Yeah, he sure was. And walking those grounds with you was really neat. It kind of reminded me of walking around Europe a little bit. I mean, stuff's even older there, but that's, you know, that's a piece of American history that's quite old. And on those grounds, of course, is a church. And it was a beautiful church. I wish we could have gone inside, but it's a really unique church. And the church was built in 1928, so not too long after the original fort was built. And it was really good to see that church. And it reminded me of all the churches that I saw in Europe. And it seems like everywhere I go, I see these churches and these Jeeps. And it just reminds me of Dad.
Yeah, I mean, those were things in his life, you know, of course, the churches, and he was the driver of the Jeep. So that was a big part of how we remember him as well. You know, going back to Camp Hale, Colorado, where the 99th did their training, that part of their training is an incredible part of the story because they went out to get this mountain ski, winter feeling about all that kind of stuff. And you recently went up to the Rockies near that area and discovered some really cool historical markers too, right?
Yeah, living in Colorado, it's easy for me to go see these things. And so I was in Vail in January. And so I took a little time to go out and explore a little bit and came across some of the memorials that are there for the 10th Mountain Division. Now, you got to remember the 10th Mountain Division trained at Camp Hale right alongside the 99th Infantry Battalion. They were a much larger group than the 99th. There was 15,000 men in the 10th Mountain Division and only about 1,000 men in the 99th Infantry Battalion. So the 10th Mountain's really well known in the Vail Valley. So some of the things I saw as I walked around there, Vail has recognized on a plaque their service that those men had done in their training in that area and then overseas when they fought. And in addition to the plaque, they have this really cool statue of a 10th Mountain Division a trainee in camp in his winter warfare gear, and it's really neat to take a look at it. It's just on one side of the Vail covered bridge that crosses Gore Creek.
When you showed me that picture, Ken,
yeah.
It was really striking because I've never seen that statue before, but it made me just go back to the Bergen book that had the 99th training up in Camp Hale, and they're marching, and it looks exactly the same as they're marching with the white, I don't know, I guess it would be an outfit or uniform they'd wear to blend in with the snow. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it really struck a chord with me because that's what we see in the Bergen book, obviously. And I'm not sure what they wore over their uniform. It almost looks like sheets, something very thin.
Maybe it's like a coverall or something, they have their uniform underneath there and they have them. Those guys could have needed that extra protection when they're in the Battle of the Bulge for sure. But it was probably just like a coverall or something.
Yeah. Yeah, so as I worked my way through the town of Vale, I came across some more things. Right there on the other side of the covered bridge is the 10th Mountain Whiskey Distillery
Hmm.
distribution point. So there's a shop right there where you can go in and buy 10th Mountain Whiskey. So the good old 10th Mountain gets recognized, and I kind of feel like we're the forgotten stepchild in the
Yeah.
99th, but we were a much smaller force, and the 99th, as we were going to talk about today, did some really significant things, just like the 10th did. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we can at least recognize them.
I feel like we are, honored to carry the torch for the 99th. We're gonna let as many people that would listen to our podcast know about the 99th Infantry Battalion separate, the Viking Battalion, and really share that information because we should be, thought of in the same way as the 10th Mountain Division, even though we're a little bit smaller.
Right, right. I agree with you 100%, Chris. So as I continued my little stroll through Vale that day, I walked over to what they call International Bridge. And on International Bridge, they fly a certain number of flags of certain countries. And sure enough, they had, in addition to the U.S. flag, they had the Norwegian flag flying over the International Bridge. So that was good to see. And then I worked my way up the hill closer to the ski mountain. And right at the base of the ski mountain, Chris, is a wonderful statue of a local rancher named Earl Eaton, and he's talking to a 10th Mountain Division soldier who is now back from the war, and it's 19, I think 57 or so, and they're talking about developing the ski area, and the soldier is Pete Seibert. And so if you look closely at the statue, Pete's wearing a cap that's got the 10th Mountain Division logo on it. So it really ties in completely with what we experienced in our understanding of Dad's history with the 99th Infantry Battalion. Here's the 10th Mountain doing things post-war to develop the Vale ski area.
Yeah, it's so crazy because like we talked about in episode, I think it was 2 in our World War II Dad's podcast. If you go back in there, is we talk so much about the training of the 99th and being in Camp Hale. And then, of course, how our dad had no Colorado connection
Right.
to the 99th or anything until he, was in the workforce and moved out there into Colorado in the 60s. So it's just one of those weird things that, Colorado played a big role. And it was just absolutely so cool to see that 99th and the 10th Mountain Division stuff that's just right in your backyard, man. It's right there.
Yeah, and you talk about Colorado connections. Here's just an interesting side note is my wife, Dawn, in 1968 moved to Vale from Wisconsin, which was kind of right in the backyard. It's right across the Mississippi.
Like near Stillwater, right? Close to
Well, it's more across from close, but but across from Hudson.
Yeah.
And she was born in River Falls, Wisconsin. So that ties us back to Minnesota, which is the story of this trip. So she moves with her family in 1968 to Vale. They end up renting a house from Earl Eaton, the man that's in the statue as the local rancher. They rented his house back in 1968, 69, something like that.
So it's just there's a lot of these connections, and then we come full circle on a lot of these things. That's really cool. All right.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the main reason for our trip, that roundtable discussion about the 99th and that new book we were talking about earlier, the Viking Battalion, Norwegian-American Ski Troopers in World War II. What were your thoughts on the roundtable, Ken?
I'm so glad we went because, when I suggested the trip, I was kind of teasing with you like, it's only 6.5 hour drive from Chicago. I'll fly up. And I thought you were going to say, I can't get away. I mean, it's vacation days. I can't leave work. You jumped all over it, Chris. And I'm like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we did. So we went to the Minnesota Historical Museum, I think it's called.
Society, I think. Yeah. I think
Society. Yes. And they had a great auditorium there. And, we were able to step into the auditorium and found some great seats, and I couldn't believe how packed it was. They had a great turnout, and all 3 editors were there on stage to talk about the Viking Battalion book, and it was just a great presentation and a great evening all the way around.
Yeah, so we mentioned Erik Brun already. Brun, excuse me, was one of the editors, and then Olaf, is it Minge? How do you pronounce his last name?
That's right. Yeah, Olaf Minge,
and then of course
Ward.
Kyle Ward. So the 3 editors of the book were sitting there, and we were able to to interact with them and learn some more things about the 99th. And Ken, you kind of participated in that discussion. We should take a look.
My question for you all is, the book is a really great collection of these memoirs. How did you come about collecting all of these memoirs from these different individuals? Because it really pieced really well together.
A lot of them came from Sioux Falls. So we were able to get out there and brought the material back. And so what you find in the book is a couple of official histories. You find some memoirs, there's some letters, but a lot of things that we just really found were just kind of scraps, notes that people had written back and forth to each other, things that they had said along the way. So that's why we just kind of compiled all of that. So there's not a consistency throughout. And then the 99th at one point in time, they tried to write their own book. So we've got that in there and got through about 5-6 chapters before it kind of fell apart at that point in time.
We're still collecting as a consequence of this and the other books that have come out. Other family members are finding things that are sending in, so we've got more to share.
Well, and we're in the process of creating a new public face of the foundation on its website, posting that. But that kind of points to this is each scrap it tells a story, and it's in peril.
So Erik stated how important it is to, really capture and retain this information about the world's greatest generation, but especially about the 99th Infantry Battalion, their stories and the artifacts. And, I think you and I have kind of done our part in trying to do that and capture that for history. And I hope other people continue to do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, a main reason that you and I kind of started this, and it was your suggestion that you want to save this for your family to start. And then it just it kept on growing and growing, that we can share this with generations to come when we're long gone, that maybe in this medium of having, video and audio, and it's digital now, that it could be preserved a little bit longer, and we'll have a reason to keep this stuff alive for very important reasons. But Ken, I got to tell you, your knowledge base on all the things that Dad's unit that he went through and the 99th went through, I know it's expanded so much over the past year, but I was so impressed. Many of the things that you and I talked about that you brought to this podcast, Erik and Olaf and Kyle talked about, and I'm like, this is what I would never have known any of that kind of stuff. You knew it, you learned it, you retained it, and so you're doing the work too to maintain this stuff. So I appreciate that. And there's many things that we did already know, like you said, and you shared with us before, but we learned some new things. At least I know I did. And I'll tell you some of those things. I thought it was extremely interesting that, and I think Erik mentioned this, that if a soldier got injured or was ill and was taken off the lines, right? That's when a replacement soldier would come in. That same soldier may not rejoin his group. I mean, I know the Army will do as best they can to get him back to his unit, but he then becomes a replacement soldier too. So he just gets cycled through. So can you imagine being with these guys, getting injured, and then not being able to return, especially this unit that is made up of Norwegian-Americans primarily. And this is your brotherhood. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. And you can understand how they would feel that way, because you're fighting for the man in the foxhole next to you, right, in addition to your country. And if you get pulled off the line for some reason, you may not be able to go back to those guys. You're thrown in with a whole bunch of new guys. Yeah, it was nuts. What else was kind of striking for you? What's some things you learned? So I loved at the roundtable discussion with the editors that they talked about Operation Greif, because it's so interesting when you relate it to the Viking battalion, because Operation Greif was during the Battle of the Bulge, and it was a plan by the Nazis to use English-speaking Nazi soldiers to infiltrate our lines, turn signs around, confuse the communication. They'd walk right up to our lines in American Jeeps and talk to them and say things that would throw them off. And so over the first few hours of the Battle of the Bulge campaign, our soldiers started to figure this out. So now they're on high alert. Well, then you got the 30th Infantry Division comes in to Malmedy with the 99th Infantry Battalion that's already there. They start talking to the Viking Battalion. Well, guess what? The Viking Battalion guys have thick accents, and the Americans can't understand a Norwegian accent from a German accent. To them, it's just an accent that sounds foreign. So right away, the Viking Battalion, they're suspects.
Yeah, the Americans are leery of this thing because they know what the Germans are trying to do. Are these guys Germans trying to confuse us? Right. And I think Erik mentioned to us that it's a Germanic language, Norwegian is, so it has the same kind of inflections and whatnot.
Sure.
And of course, there's another point of that story too, is that since the 99th wasn't attached to a regiment, they're like, who are these guys? Who are these 99th, right?
Right. Very, very few of the other divisions had even heard of the 99th Infantry Battalion because they were separate and they were kind of a stopgap in a number of areas.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point. Another thing that was kind of cool that we learned about was because they were separate, the 99th, eventually they partnered up with, and was a new unit, but a new kind of regiment was created, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 474th Infantry Regiment, Mm-hmm. And they were folded into that. And we learned during the roundtable of what some of the new insignias and what the patch was made up and where they came from. So I thought that was very cool. Like, for example, the red spearhead that makes up the big portion of the new patch was the same as the Special Forces or Delta Force or Special Operations. And the Devil's Brigade, which was the first Special Service Force. So it looked exactly like that shape, that kind of red spear thing. It was very cool.
Right. And, in our podcast, when I had showed Dad's Eisenhower jacket, that patch is on there, and we weren't sure about everything in it. Well, one of the things that we saw in it was that black ribbon above the Viking ship. And that black ribbon refers to the Darby's Rangers, which was the first Ranger Battalion. They were the ones that invaded North Africa. And Darby was their leader. And he had trained these guys. They were very successful in Africa. And he had so much success in Africa that the military wanted to use him further in Italy. And they said, we're going to fit you out with more troops. Well, the troops that they fitted him out with weren't as well trained as his men that he had trained himself personally. Mm-hmm. And they did a good job in Italy. But because of these newer recruits, they struggled a little bit. And in fact, at Anzio and Cisterna, they really had a tough go of things, and they were decimated. So the remaining Rangers, come January of 1945, are sent to Barneville, France, where Dad sent, and joined with the 99th and these Rangers to form this new regiment, the 474th.
That's an incredible story. Yeah, we didn't know what that black ribbon above there was, but it's shaped the same way as the Rangers patch is. And of course, the other element, the third element that made up the 474th Infantry Regiment was the Viking ship. Of course, the Viking ship is from the original 99th patch.
Yeah, that's right. And I kind of like it because it's the biggest part of the patch.
Of course.
Yeah. And shortly after they were formed, Chris, the 474th was called into duty to assist with what was found at the Merkers mine. So this was a salt mine that the Americans discovered, and it was filled with stolen art treasures, gold coins, things like that the Nazis had stolen out of the countries that they invaded and secured it away there. Well, the Americans found that and knew that it had to be returned to the rightful owners. So the 474th was asked to provide the security for the escort and the convoy into Frankfurt to get this stuff moved into a vault in Frankfurt in a bank. So they played an important role right away.
Yeah, it's just incredible. They did so many amazing things. They talked about it, and something that stuck with me during that roundtable is how the 99th was the Forrest Gump of World War II. A unit that was looked upon maybe with not the, on the surface of somewhat being a throw off to others, like we already talked about how they were kind of thought maybe not in the same way the 10th Mountain Division, So here's this unit that wasn't supposed to be special that ended up being extremely special, and they experienced some monumental World War II moments. It was incredible. So let me share some of those that we thought about. Being separate and not attached to a regiment, they were able to move so fast, right? We even talked about how that tank commander said, I've never seen these guys move so fast. No one has ever beat us to locations kind of situation. And they were called upon very often because they were nimble. They weren't attached to anything else. They could move and do things fast. Forrest Gump was pretty fast, right?
Right, that's right. Yeah, it's an interesting analogy because I think it's accurate. I mean, the 99th, if you think about the Forrest Gump movie, he ends up in all these like historical events, and the 99th was right there alongside a lot of these historical events. In fact, they were part of the group of troops that were the first Americans to defeat and secure a German city, and that was at Aachen, Germany. And so our guys get credit for that as part of the Forrest Gump battalion.
It's incredible. And they were also, honored and got some really prestigious assignments because out of the 99th, 50 men and 2 officers were selected to the 1st Army headquarters to guard General Bradley. I mean, huge name, General Bradley, and then General Hodges after that. So, just like Forrest, they got to do some incredible things and met and guarded some high-level officials. It was cool.
Right. And then, Chris, they were very active at the Battle of the Bulge. They were quickly called in on December 16th and 17th into Malmedy to put a stop to the advance from the Germans at that point. And so they played a critical role there. They're not really recognized for it as much as, say, Band of Brothers and Bastogne, but they were only like 45 miles from Bastogne. They're doing the same thing. They weren't surrounded, but they were doing a good job of keeping the Germans at bay.
Yeah, and they're the first to get to Malmedy when they needed help from it was like the engineers were just
the engineers were there. Yeah, that's right.
It's incredible. So also, we already talked about it, but the Merkers mine event in that transportation of those treasures and protecting them, that was a movie. The Monument Men, that was a story about that find and protecting those treasures. And here we are, the 99th being famous for something that a lot of people know about because of the film.
Right. They certainly played a role in that. They absolutely did. And then this is the more somber point. A few of the 99th guys were called into Buchenwald, a concentration camp. In fact, one of the editors, Olaf Minge, his grandfather was the battalion, I don't know if it's a surgeon or doctor.
Yeah.
And he was called to Buchenwald, and he witnessed the atrocities there. So the 99th, once again, plays a role in witnessing the Holocaust as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were there in every part of it. And then they got to be in the celebration, like we talked about, it was kind of a bittersweet celebration, but they were back to Norway, their home country. It's incredible because they were able to welcome the King of Norway back from his exile and be the unit that kind of received him and protected him. And what an honor. And it was just an amazing thing. And it's like, when Forrest gets what's the incredible honor that those soldiers get that not a lot of them get?
The Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yeah, when he gets that. So it was that kind of thing for these guys in Norway. So, I just love thinking about the 99th as Forrest Gump. And I'm going to continue to do so probably for the rest of the time because that embodies to me what these guys were. They were in these incredible sites doing what is asked of them without wanting the recognition, just doing their job. And that was so cool. But I guess, when we're talking about this incredible roundtable event, it was just so cool. And I think my favorite part was after the event, we went out to the lobby and we had an opportunity to talk with other sons and daughters and grandsons and just relatives of these guys that served in the 99th. And it was cool because share stories like us. We want to know, did your dad know my dad? Did your grandfather know your uncle, this uncle? It was so cool to have these conversations and try to pinpoint, what exactly happened, because we're still searching for all these kind of, links to find out the stories from their incredible experience.
Yeah, it was great doing that. I wish we had had more time, but it was a great opportunity to visit with Erik Brun directly and talk to him about some specific questions I had regarding Malmedy and where C Company was on the maps. And he was so kind to open up the maps and show me what he had seen there. And then we got a chance to visit with Olaf and Kyle as well, and learn about their backgrounds a bit, and talk to Olaf about his grandfather. So we got to visit with all three editors. They all signed our book, which was fantastic. And I just really enjoyed that time that we could spend with them after the roundtable. Erik is such a wealth of knowledge for us, and one of the editors of the book. So it was a good time to really visit with him and learn that he's a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army. He runs the 99th Facebook group, as we knew, and he's really a well-read and well-written historian of military history.
And so, that very next morning, we got a text from him just saying how much he, enjoyed, talking with us, and wish we had more time. And he said, I'm still here at the hotel. I got a couple hours. You guys want to come over and continue our conversation? We're like, yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So we made the trip over. We spent some time with him. You really got to, get your questions answered, and you guys sat and talked, and I just absorbed it all. It was terrific. And we got a nice picture to cap off our great trip. But, even though he was very generous with his time, and we definitely appreciate it, there's something that we're missing. He's a great supporter of ours and our efforts in putting together our World War II Dad. But what we don't know, and what we need to learn more about, is his World War II Dad. So, Erik, thank you for making even more time for Ken and me, and welcome to our World War II Dad.
Well, thank you so much. It's terrific to be able to see you guys again. I was getting together there in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Thank you.
Well, yeah, we're really glad to have you here, Erik. And, your knowledge of the 99th is quite extensive, as I've learned over the years dealing with you, and really your knowledge overall of how the Army works with your experience as well. But you probably wouldn't know any of this history about the 99th or studied the 99th if it wasn't for your dad, Christian Brun, one of the original members who served in C Company like our dad did, and was part of the first U.S. Army Guard detachment. So can you tell us about him and how he came to serve in the 99th Infantry Battalion separate?
Well, he was a real good student. He worked really, really hard. He worked all during school. He graduated early in 1939, December of 39. He went to University of Washington. And he was in his third year at University of Washington. And what he'd experienced to that point was, his homeland that he had no real memories of, large memories, just kind of impressions. But he knew that was his home country, and he was still an alien with first papers. Since the 1920s, there really was no movement on citizenship.
How did he finally get accepted to actually fight for his new country, protecting his old country?
Well, and this ties into the research I've been doing, that there was an officer in the Military Intelligence Division who proposed to General Marshall that there's a way that we've got to reach out to these aliens because we can use them. And he very specifically came up with a plan to do that. And that involved changing laws. So aliens fell under selective service, but since they hadn't been registered for the draft, they had to do an alien registration for that. And that's what my father experienced when he had to go get fingerprinted. That's all going along. Well, he had really wanted to serve, able-bodied young man. And as a matter of fact, on December 7th, 1942, on Saturday, he received his American, the president extends his wishes. They give you like 10 days to get your affairs in order. He reports back to Fort Lewis. They say something about, oh, you're Norwegian? That's okay, we got this. And next thing you know, he's on a train to Pando, Colorado, which was the train station siding for Camp Hale. And the 99th had just arrived at Camp Hale, and he had Christmas dinner in the barracks, in the mess halls there, surrounded by Norwegians, surrounded by people that looked like him. And it's kind of the joke. I went to Norway in 1977, and I realized that everybody looked like my dad.
Until our father joined up with him and didn't necessarily look like him. But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Being a Norwegian-American, your dad, many of the soldiers were also that, of course, in the 99th and the Viking Battalion, of course. Did your dad know any of those guys? Was he friends with anybody before he started serving? Any families?
No, he grew up. The odds are maybe somebody in the battalion he may have known before. I never remember him mentioning it, but he grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and Norwegian was actually an elective in school.
Wow.
And he was able to keep engaged on that. But his bunkmate is a great example. TW. TW had been torpedoed off an oil tanker and arrived in the 99th, less than a month later, because as soon as he arrived in the United States from the rescue vessel, they registered him. Because the draft was a geographical thing. It wasn't necessarily a citizenship thing at that point. And that's how much it had changed from January 1st of 1942 to mid-42. So TW arrived, didn't speak a word of English, and my dad worked with him. Actually, they translated one of the field manuals page by page, and Dad did such a good job that TW ended up a staff sergeant by the end of the deal, and Dad was a private first class.
So he finishes up his training at Camp Hale, and he ships off to England with the rest of the guys. But then you told us in Minneapolis something interesting happens to him where he's selected for some special service, right? Can you tell us about that?
So what happened in April of 1944? So now they arrive in October. There's some special train up that they're going through, getting ready for the invasion. The battalion is directly attached to First Army headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, First Army headquarters has come over from the United States, where it had been learning how to be an Army headquarters. And it arrives. General Bradley takes the command, and this 99th Battalion, this 1,000 guys, doesn't fit in anywhere else. Of the 900 battalions in the American Army in World War II, almost all of them served as part of a regiment, as part of a division. It's like 98% of them. But the 99th was a separate, so they just gave it directly to Army headquarters. But that kind of is like special teams. Okay, you have offensive and defensive in football, but then you got special teams, right? And they belong directly to the coach. They don't belong to either of those groups. So as the separate battalion, they're there. Well, at some point, the Army headquarters decides that they want a little more security for their headquarters in the field. So they write a letter or an order to the battalion and say, hey, we want 50 guys and 2 officers, and they need to be here by the 1st of May. So my dad was one of the ones selected for that. And those 50 guys were at First Army headquarters until January 45. Now,
which is located where, Eric? Where's First Army headquarters at this time?
So, for instance, you guys talk about Tilth.
Yeah.
Well, the First Army headquarters was at Spa, and that was nearby. But that 50-man team would be responsible for 24-hour security at a handful of positions. Like in the parking lot, as you come in, you would pass one of their guards, and you'd be ID checked. And as you left the parking lot and you came into the actual compound itself, you'd get checked again.
And Eric, who was the highest brass that your dad was actually guarding at those headquarters?
Bradley and Hodges.
Wow. Okay.
And so that was a 4-star command.
Yeah.
the joke where I was going there, it was they all got a kick out of it because someone would come in through the first guard, and then the second guard, and the third guard, and they would be saying, "Didn't I just see you?"
Because all the Norwegians.
Well, and Dad's memory of it was everybody was 6 foot, blonde haired, blue eyed, and it was. And I don't see Bradley asking for that, but I certainly see a staff officer or a senior NCO adding that to the recipe.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a compliment to your dad, Erik, that he was really a shining star to get that assignment.
Yeah, but something that I really come to understand is that sometimes the compliments backfire in a way. I think for him it was the rest of his friends in C Company did go to the Canal Drive and did go to Versland and did go to the Bulge, and his combat story was they got rousted and they were standing on top of First Army headquarters looking for German paratroopers because that was the target. Bradley would have been one of the targets, the VIPs that they would be trying. Not Bradley in this case. This would be Hodges. Bradley was there. He had First Army for the invasion, and as soon as the lodgment took place, he moved up to 12th Army Group, which was the next headquarters higher. And Hodges came in as the First Army commander to keep pushing at that level.
So he was in that position during the whole war, or did he go and join up? Was he with the other guys at any other point?
My dad, one of his statements was that he kept asking to go, and the NCOs didn't want to release him. He had kind of a survivor's guilt from that. He didn't feel he was, he had been held back for a high prestige, because nobody wants the drunk guy showing up in front of the general. Okay.
Right.
So it's a high stakes game there.
So what I think you're saying is that your dad may have had a little bit, like you said, some guilt that his countrymen are off fighting and I'm here and more of a
most definitely.
Yeah.
And you had the memory of your father, his reaction when his ritual was to take a warm shower before bed. Kind of his form of meditation really. But the time that if you turn the lights off, you're there, you're back.
You're right. Yep.
You're living out of this part of your brain.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Erik, because I think you talked about this when we were in person in Minneapolis, that the Norwegians were sometimes mistaken for German soldiers because of the accent. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what
that is a very important thing to keep in mind, and that's kind of the downside of an organization like that is you don't have the usual movie, Sunday matinee movie with a guy from a cowboy and an Italian from New York or Chicago or
Pittsburgh Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. Everybody was Norwegian, but in Norwegian's a Germanic language. It may not, to a practiced ear, you can tell, really tell the difference. But if you're talking to someone from one of those other parts of the country, it's suspicious.
Very much.
And that time, that's exactly why Scorzani and those Operation Greif, but specifically during the Battle of the Bulge, because the Germans were really trying to exploit. They actually had gone back through the German military and identified people who had lived in the United States. But honestly, it wasn't a very sophisticated project that they had. These guys weren't necessarily volunteers. They had been segregated politically because they didn't know if they could trust them, so they were already on a list. They were using deep penetration. They had dropped paratroopers in with specific tasks of confusing by changing road signs or and actually that's reported by the 99th that there were a couple of the Germans arrive in American uniforms, in American vehicles to try to get past the first point of resistance.
Yeah, Ken and I spoke about that. Yeah, right, Ken, and we spoke about that in a previous episode, right?
We did, and that had to put your dad, Erik, your World War II dad, on high alert, because part of that strategy was that Eisenhower was going to be attacked, and he was back in Paris at that time. So your father, who's protecting, who is it? Is it Bradley at that time, or who's he protecting?
It was Hodges.
Hodges had to put him on high alert.
Yeah, well, yes, and everybody talks about Eisenhower because he was the big fish. No, they would have gone after the Army commanders as well, and specifically the First Army commander, because that northern flank, they were trying to coordinate the movement of units to that northern flank. There were close to 45,000 troops moving by that first evening. It's just the 99th was in the first responders. That was the go-to unit, and they could, by the time they could pass the first message, they had already talked to Colonel Hanson and given him the move order.
And move those guys to Malmedy right away.
Yeah. And they were scattered all over Huckington. They had one of their companies that was actually due west of Bastogne at St. Hubert at a German munitions storage area that they were guarding. And they had to move north to get to Mount.
Wow. And Ken and I were speaking, and I think it's true for you as well. These men didn't speak much about this war. It's hard to get this information. Did your dad ever talk to you about, his toughest moment overseas, what he experienced? Like that, this one was the worst one I ever experienced. Any of those kind of stories?
The terror experiences he had were the V1s that you were talking about. First Army headquarters was near Tilth, so they lost about 900 V1s, 1,000 pounds apiece, into Liège, and that was going overhead. Things he would mention was, we knew track 1 went over that tree and passed overhead and went past the church steeple behind us because that was going to Liège. And if it came in track 2, it was, it was that tree and it was over that thing. But these were not perfect machines. And as you said, when that ramjet motor stopped, look out. And they'd had several close calls. Both, he had mentioned the close call he had. There was a movie theater in Liège that was hit and like 400 casualties.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
Oh no, it was actually one of on land, the biggest single loss of life to the Allies. Perfect storm. Yet, being called to stand guard over the Army headquarters when they knew full well that the reason the Germans were infiltrating, besides pandemonium, but they were going for high value targets. Some of the other impressions was to see the ambulance trains. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, that happened within the first hours there. But here we're, since June, everything's been moving forward. After the breakup, and all of a sudden to see this disorder and these
the casualties.
Yeah, that was them. They had to emerge under emergency conditions. Moved the headquarters from Spa, which they knew was a known target, to Chaudfontaine and moved into the British sector to make sure that they had a safe command and control position. And these things kind of flow. Though, the thing that in his last days, and I found this kind of amusing at the moment, but kind of telling in a way. He woke up and he was all like terror, but the terror came from Camp Hale. And the terror was that the first sergeant had sent him back to the rear to go to the hospital, but he didn't want to go to the hospital, and he hid in the barracks because he was afraid he would get pulled from the unit.
Oh, wow.
And this disobeying thing that he did, that kept him with the unit. That they could have, if the orthopedic would have looked at him, maybe he would have said, no, you need to send him off to a general hospital for something.
Isn't that a common thread, Erik, where these men, they were fighting for their country, but really they were fighting for the man beside them, and that was the most important thing to them, and that's why your dad did not want to leave Camp Hale.
In this case, yes. Yeah, he didn't want to leave. He was afraid to go to the hospital because that may have caused that to happen. He may have lost. I'm sure they saw that in their friends. His heat training was dangerous. Okay,
right.
And somebody hits a tree. Next thing you know, they're down for an orthopedic injury, and the unit's only going to be training for another 3 months. The guy goes with 2 broken legs. He's not going to come back. He's not going to join the battalion. He may come back to the army, but he's not going to join the battalion.
So let's get back to what we're talking about, after Malmedy and all that kind of stuff. As we're approaching VE Day, there's maybe an opportunity that this Viking battalion is going back to the homeland, right? Is that the next possibility?
Yeah. So in October of 44, they decided, okay, the agreement in 43 was that the Americans would provide a regimental combat team plus the 99th to go to Norway.
Is that why they were partnered up with the 474th then?
Exactly. As a matter of fact, the 474th was created for that mission.
So they made it to Norway, in June or July? Is that when they got there? Did your dad have any relatives that he saw there when he got there? Tell us about that.
Plenty. So they were timed to arrive before the king. And the 99th was disembarked in Oslo itself. The rest of the 474th moved to Drammen. They were used as the honor guard to receive the king when the king came on the 5th anniversary of his exile.
Pretty proud moment for your dad, I would imagine, right?
Yes, and for all of them. And whether they were there on dockside, 100 some odd, 6 foot, blonde haired, blue eyed, that thing.
Most of them were. Remember that. Most of them were. Some of them were short 5'6" Italians.
Well, but then there were guards scattered the whole way because the king was received at the harbor, but then went up and processed all the way to the palace, and so they were security through that whole thing. And there could have been a true believer that decided to throw a hand grenade or something.
Yeah.
Even though my dad wasn't Norwegian-American, it made a huge impression on him because a lot of the things he saved had to do with welcoming the king back. So he felt very proud. And I imagine your dad, it was 10 times that, being a Norwegian-American.
Yes. And whether they were a Norwegian fresh off the boat like TW, or like my father, who had grown up with Norway on the mind, though he was born in Norway, but he was 2.
Yeah, right.
He grew up in the United States, but he had a foot in both worlds. Or the many second and third generation Americans who grew up with the Norwegian culture around them, and they went to Norwegian school on Saturdays.
Right.
Things to keep the tradition alive. And of course, once everybody's together, everybody starts
telling the old stories and all that, right? Let me ask you this. I'm just gonna fast forward our story a little bit because I want to hear a lot about this. I don't think you've talked much about, at least to us. So after the war, we're gonna go ahead and speed up that your dad's back home. Tell us about his life after the war. What did you learn about that before you came about in your family?
Well, he went back to school, GI Bill, and honestly, this was a memory comes here that was the thing that really drove me, and still, actually, I'm trying to close the loop on this one. Dad went back to the University of Washington. One of his professors taught a class on, today you'd call it like marketing or persuasion. Then it was called propaganda, small p. That's the way I do it. And at the end of the first class, the guy asked for all the veterans to come down, and he wanted to talk to him. And he talked to everybody, and all of the vets, and there were a lot of them. This is 1946.
Yeah.
And when Dad said he was in the 99th, he said, "Oh yeah, I worked with, we worked with them. We used them. So I have to figure out who this guy is, and I haven't closed the loop on it."
So what you're telling us, Erik, is that your quest is never going to stop, and it seems like Ken and I's quest is never going to stop. We're going to try to gain as much information as possible, right?
Well, and I've been on a power drive to gather information, and I'm really excited when we were sitting there talking to you guys that I'm not alone. As Ken, you've seen me for a few years now, answering all those same basic 5 or 6 questions that everybody has.
Yes.
But I've got 10 times more raw material than I can process myself.
You've done so much research in figuring all this out. I mean, Ken, this is your book that you recently put out, Erik, along with Olaf and Kyle, and it's just a great resource. Ken, you know so much about this. This is kind of helpful to you as well, right?
That book, Erik, I loved every minute of it. And it was such a good value to me because I was able to immerse myself in it when it was right off the press or just about to go to press even. And we used it in our podcast talking about our dad and really hearing firsthand accounts of these soldiers that were on the front lines with him. It's a wonderful book. And, I recommend it to anybody who's interested in World War II history to read it because it tells such a great story of really a specialized unit that was just one piece in the cog of this World War II machine that helped bring freedom back to everybody.
Where can people find the book?
It's available on, Casement is the publisher, but it's available through all the normal mass market sources.
Before we let you go, because we're running out of time, before we let you go, could you tell me, if you can, your most cherished, memory of your dad? What is the thing that you will, take with you for years to come?
Well, much later in his life, I started reaching out to the people around him, and the things that they would say about an honorable, trustworthy, thoughtful man. I was growing up. I was a teenager. I was trying to get out, start my own life, and I miss being able to go back in the Wayback Machine and truly enjoy those things with my dad.
So, Erik, it sounds like your feelings are a lot like mine and Chris's, where our fathers didn't talk a lot about the war. And as we got older and, we're getting into our 50s, 60s, we're reflecting back on their lives. And your cherished moments are the time that you were able to talk to your dad, because your dad lived a long life. So you were fortunate enough to have those times to speak to him about your historical research. And so I think we share that common bond that, trying to speak to our fathers about their history and getting that information. We wish they were still alive to get even more out of them at this point.
And you've taken on the job, and I think Ken and I have a little bit too, of trying to preserve it. That's why we do this podcast. We want to share the information that we know, so our generations and future generations know more and more about these things, so we can keep these guys not only in our memory, but learn from their sacrifice and what they did. Erik, I can't thank you enough for your time and, of course, your knowledge. I mean, this has been fantastic. It's wonderful. I appreciate you being here and joining us, for this episode of Our World War II Dad.
you were such a valuable resource to me in this quest that I've been on for years, trying to understand my dad's service, because he didn't talk about it that much. And you filled in so many of the blanks for me. You were a real godsend to me, and your book's fantastic. That filled in the rest of the blanks. So I can't thank you enough for being such a good resource to us and helping us understand this 99th Infantry Battalion and our World War II dads during that very important era in America.
Thank you. Thanks for this honor. Yeah, this is an honor and opportunity, and thank you.
That was so great of Erik to join us on our podcast and talk about his World War II dad. And, when we talked about his most cherished moments, Chris, he mentioned the things that really resonated with me, that his dad was honorable and trustworthy and, just a good man post-war and lived a good life. And it really stuck with me that that's the things that you and I talked about in our podcast about our dad. And not only that, it was the things that our 92-year-old mother had stated to us when we interviewed her about dad's post-war experience.
What would you want people to know most about your husband, our World War II dad, Louis Cangilla? What would you want them to know most?
He was a very generous man. He always helped out the little guy, whatever was needed.
Mom, I remember at Dad's funeral, there was a part of the eulogy that talked about things that he did even while he was on dialysis. And what struck me was he did all of these charitable acts, and he never bragged about it. He never spoke about it. He did it quietly behind the scenes, and he didn't want people to know what he was doing, but he took care of the people around him.
When he was on dialysis, there was a young boy there, and he was mentally challenged. But he was probably in his late teens, and some group would bring him in. He was in some kind of a home, and they would put him on dialysis. Now, dialysis patients used to get very cold. And I always had a pillow for Dad and a blanket to keep him warm. This young boy didn't have anything. And he used to play with the little Matchbox car. And Dad said to me, Pat, I want you to go to the store and buy him a pillow and a blanket. So I did. And I gave it to one of the nurses. I said, would you be responsible to keep it clean for him? And she did. But he did things like that all the time.
Yeah, she's absolutely right. And it's remarkable because, not only does Erik think of that of his father, we do. And of course, our World War II dad's wife, our 92-year-old mother, says that about him. And she's a good judge of character, Ken, as you know. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it seems like that whole generation of soldiers came home with a sense of, duty and honor and loyalty. And you said it, they not only fought for their country, but more so, they fought for the guy in the foxhole next to them, or in the cockpit, or in the sub, or the tank. They fought for the guy that was right there with them. And it was an incredible feat, and those guys need to be remembered. All right, brother, we're at the end of this episode. It's my least favorite time. They go by so fast, man. They really do. But, Ken, I'm just so pleased, and I know you are too, that, so many people are enjoying this podcast. We're a little selfish. We do it for ourselves, but we also want to, help people remember their dads and help people remember these great men that served their country and fought for the guy in the pothole, the foxhole next to them. So, please, if you're enjoying this podcast, stay in touch with us. You can comment below on the YouTube comments that you see right below the video here, or you can go to the audio podcasts and comment there, or you can drop us a line at Our World War II Dad. So that's OURWW, the number 2, DAD @gmail.com. For my brother Ken Cangilla, I'm Chris Cangilla, and we both want to thank you for joining us for Our World War II Dad. Thanks for watching and listening to Our World War II Dad. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss an episode.
And if you're just listening to the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it.